In 1812, the most powerful army the world had ever seen marched into Russia. Over 600,000 men. Napoleon had spent a decade winning. 6 months later, barely 100,000 came home. Ask anyone why, and they all say the same thing: the Russian winter, General Frost. But here's the problem with that answer. Most of his army was already dead before the first snowflake ever fell. Boxley steps onto a dusty road. June. Boiling hot. Napoleon has a plan so simple it can't fail. March east, crush the Russian army in one giant battle, and force the Tsar to surrender. He'd done exactly this a dozen times. But the Russians did something no one expected. They refused to fight. They retreated. And as they retreated, they burned everything behind them. Crops, villages, food, all of it turned to ash. An army that big has to eat every single day. And Russia made very sure there was nothing left to eat. 600,000 men need food constantly. And the supply wagons couldn't keep up on Russia's endless dirt roads. So the soldiers marched hungry, in brutal summer heat, drinking from filthy puddles. Then came the real killer, disease. Bad water brought dysentery, and crawling in every soldier's uniform were body lice, carrying deadly fevers from man to man. Within the first weeks, before a single major battle, around 80,000 men were dead or too sick to march. The horses were dying too, fed only unripe rye that made them ill. And dead horses meant no cavalry, no wagons, no cannon moving forward. Napoleon hadn't even fought the Russians yet, and he'd already lost a third of his army. But that's the part the story leaves out, because the version we're told begins with the snow. In September, Napoleon finally got his battle, Borodino. 70,000 men fell in a single day, the bloodiest single day of the entire era. And Napoleon won, sort of. The Russians pulled back in good order, still an army. A week later, Napoleon marched into Moscow, expecting the Tsar to beg for peace. The city was empty. The Russians had simply abandoned it. And that night, Moscow began to burn. Historians still argue over who struck the first match. But most point to the Russians themselves, scorched earth one final time. Within days, most of the city was ash. Napoleon sat in the ruins of his prize, waiting for a surrender that never came. He waited more than a month. He had won his battle, taken the capital, and it had bought him nothing. Then the temperature started to drop. Now came the retreat everyone remembers. But the army limping out of Moscow was already a ghost. Starving, sick, a shadow of what marched in. And they retreated back through the same land they'd already stripped bare. Nothing to eat, again. Now add the cold. Men froze where they slept. Horses dropped by the thousands. At the Borodino River, thousands drowned crossing on 2 makeshift bridges. The winter didn't defeat Napoleon's army. It finished off what was already dying. The greatest army on earth had simply ceased to exist. So why did Napoleon really lose? It wasn't one enemy. It was arithmetic. An army too big to feed in a country too big to conquer, against a people willing to burn their own homes rather than surrender. The winter took the blame. But the real victors were hunger, disease, and the lice in a soldier's coat. Napoleon could beat any general alive. He just couldn't beat the map. I'm Boxley. Follow along and let's go time traveling again.